You are listening to TBR Radio presents the DIXIE Heritage Show, with your host, the Director of DIXIE Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Our guest on today's TBR Radio presents the DIXIE Heritage Show is TBR Executive Editor Paul Angel. The July-August issue of TBR magazine is going out in the mail here in just a few days. And so Paul and I were discussing that issue in particular. We begin our conversation with Paul's editorial in the magazine. He talks about the new religion, if you will, which is white guilt, and it's the new religion of liberalism. And as he discusses that, he just gives us a lot of insight into what's going on in the United States right now with the removal of Confederate monuments and the ongoing attack against our Southern culture and heritage. And the editorial, did you write that, or did one of the other writers write that? But I found it very interesting, the left's new religion.
Yes, I wrote that because we got to look at this. The news is so bad, so much, you got to take a little bit of a lighthearted view, although it's extremely serious. And it is the left's new religion. The left's new religion is the church of white guilt. And so in our editorial, I mean, we could read it, but people might want to see that, or we might want to see it posted online. It just discusses what the churches of the future will probably be doing if they want to get their 501c3 contributions and be approved by Black Lives Matter and Antifa, et cetera, et cetera. So it just tells the tale of a poor man who walked into the wrong church and listened to the sermons of the future, shall we say.
You know, I've often thought of liberalism, if you will, in terms of religion. For example, I believe it takes more faith to believe in evolution than it does to believe in creation. And it takes a lot of faith to believe in climate change. And so I've often believed that the left was more religious than anyone ever gave them credit for. It's just, you know, like you say here, their religion's a little different from what we would think of as Christianity or religion. But you're right. It takes to have that much hate and that much, I'm trying to get the word out, like, it starts with a V. It's not vitrosity, but I think you know the word that I'm going for here.
Vitriol.
Vitriol, that's right. To have that much vitriol and just to have that much intensity in what we're seeing in this Black Lives Matter movement right now. These people have to be stirred up into a religious frenzy right now, because even drugs couldn't get them pumped up that high.
It is a religion, and it's a scary one, because even Christians amongst themselves will argue or debate about certain meanings of certain scriptures, and usually, although things might get pretty heated in church, we all understand that we're all members of the same family and that we have the same goals. Here, of course, you either accept this religion or you are ostracized. You are fired from your job. Your relative is fired from a job, as happened to this policeman in Minneapolis whose stepmother was fired simply for being related to him. You're going to have your podcast taken down, your YouTube channel taken down, your credit card processing canceled. The left has no tolerance whatsoever for debate because they can't win a debate. The fake narrative they're running now, of course, is systemic racism in America. And I think it's Thomas Sowell who said, yeah, racism does exist. There's vestiges of it. But the only reason it's still on life support is because people like Al Sharpton, who rely on this particular fake narrative, this fake belief system that Americans are especially white Americans, of course, are racist to the core. We know this isn't true because you see a great number of white people marrying black people, lots of, and I'm sure that the white woman who marries the black man isn't systemically racist, and there's a huge number of them, and vice versa. And we buy their music, and we watch their films and the films that they act in and they direct, and we buy their products, and we love seeing their faces on products, and we've been seeing them on Aunt Jemima syrup for years without a single racist thought. We just thought how nice Aunt Jemima had made such nice syrup, and we watch their sporting events, and we pay the tickets to see them, and we buy their jerseys. These white people at football games in the tens of thousands have the jerseys of black football players. Where's the racism? Yeah. The only racism that's really happening here, the only The only genocide we'll say is happening. The only the danger that black people face is basically from other blacks in the inner city. Racist, perhaps, to say so. I don't think so if it's the truth. But if you look at the numbers of people who are being slaughtered, the left is just completely ignoring that part of their mission, shall we say, of their proselytizing, because that's where the real poverty, the real death, the real danger is to the black community. It certainly isn't from white cops. But this is the narrative that we've been forced, or being asked, I wouldn't say even asked nicely, being forced is better, to accept or face the punishment. And the punishment is severe. It can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be financial, it can be the destruction of your property. What really bugs me now is that people who resist this narrative on the streets, when their houses are being invaded, when their property is being looted or burned, and they protect themselves, are now being called the criminals. I cannot tell you how mixed up this is, and I want to get your thoughts on it in a minute, but I'll just tell you one of these headlines that nearly had my jaw drop. That man in Dallas who went to protect some stores, and he had a machete. I doubt he was going to do anything besides threaten people with it, not with a crowd like that around. But as he went to protect the store, he charged at one black-clad Antifa member with a skateboard. Of course, they're just helpless little skateboarders. No, they're using those skateboards to smash out windows and try to get away from cops and stuff. But the headline, before I get to the headline. So the crowd got irritated with him, and blacks and whites both, but mostly blacks, I think. Beat him to a pulp, hit him in the head with pieces of concrete. The man did survive, although there were rumors that he had died. And so here's a man trying to protect the businesses from being looted and destroyed in his own hometown, while people from out of town or other parts of the town are destroying it. And the headline in the Dallas Morning News said, "Victims of machete-wielding man will not press charges." Now that was unbelievable. Here a man was beaten nearly to death for simply protecting property, and he was the one who was facing charges against a mob that just nearly killed him. And it's disgusting to see 5 or 6 people beat up one of these Antifa types. And these hoodlums who go out to loot at night, they like to go in packs. You know, they don't like to fight one-on-one. They're basically cowards, especially these Antifa types who look like the doughy rejects from Weight Watchers, right, who sit in their mom's basement. And that's who they are. Deluded white people are a big problem here, and that's why the Church of White Guilt is such a scary religion.
Open your web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
Well, I wanted to ask you a question, because you're just old enough to have been a boy during the 60s. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And so, you know, I'm just old enough to have been a boy during the 70s, and things had kind of calmed down during the 70s. At least, you know, any memories that I have of protests in the 70s are from television. They're not from any real-life experience. But you were just old enough to have been a boy during the 60s and to have seen the protests that were rampant during that decade. Unless I missed something in history, and maybe you remember things that I failed to read in the history books because they were somehow excluded, weren't there all kinds of protests in the 60s, but we didn't see statues coming down? I mean, we didn't see monuments being destroyed. We didn't see people being murdered in those protests. Or maybe those things were happening and I just missed it.
You know, I think that, yes, I was 8 years old when Martin Luther King was killed. And I lived just a couple of miles from the district line, and an area that was torched. You could see the sky lit up with flame from our home. We were sent home from school, and we had an integrated school, of course, in '68, and everybody got along quite well. But the flashback to the '60s I'm having may have colored me, and also the '70s, by the way. And I'll mention that and why these brainwashed kids don't know what the heck's going on because they haven't seen anything. But I don't remember monuments being torn down either, but we didn't have the news coverage, so I don't know. I do know that the police were quite a bit more active and supported back then, and to quell this violence, the National Guard was called in. I don't know what their role was in Washington, D.C., and that's where I was close to. I just know that afterwards, the city was in a shambles, and only meeting that type of craziness with some actual law and order solved the problem. Of course, that was as I my example is this. So before these riots broke out, I was talking to a couple of liberal friends of mine. We're about 15 years younger, so they had the benefits of not having to have lived through the 60s and 70s as a sentient child. They were very young. And I told them they hadn't really been through much, and that they had hopefully they've enjoyed the past 40 years, because it wasn't going to be the same probably for another 20, because it took forever for parts of D.C. to rebound from this devastation, and other cities across the country, but I'll stick with D.C. as my example, since I saw it personally. I mean, our parents made us go in the car and go down and see it afterwards, after it was calmed down, to let us know what had happened. But so my friends say to me, "Oh, what do you fight in World War II or something?" I'm like, I'm not that old. But I said, think about it. How many cities have you seen on fire? None. And this was before the most recent looting and riot. Of course, they were kind of bleeding heart liberals, how awful racism was and everything else. And I said, well, how many National Guard troops have you seen stationed in your corner? Well, none. How many leading presidential candidates have you seen assassinated? None. Bobby Kennedy we had. How many civil rights leaders have been assassinated? None. Well, we had three during our era: Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, and we had Malcolm X. I guess you call him a civil rights leader. He was an outspoken black, killed by his own. And then when we moved our way to the '70s, I said, how many domestic bombings did we have in the '70s, or did you have in your lifetime? And they're like, well, I guess 911. And I'm like, yeah, one day. One building, and it wasn't even a bombing, and then you had an attack on a military facility, the Pentagon. I said we had, I think it was 2,500 bombings in the course of several years, literally averaging 5 a day, from the Weather Underground, the FALN, Puerto Rican group, and the Black Panthers. So, the list was going on and on. Did you ever wait in line for gasoline? Did you ever see a massive protest? And the war protests in the Vietnam War were pretty large. But thing after thing that we went through, I mean, how many domestic airliners were hijacked in the past 40 years in this country? Not too many. We had, I think, over 150 domestic airliners hijacked in 2 years in the mid-'70s. So this whole generation, and specifically even the ones that are younger than these people, because they're 45 now, and they understand what the importance of stability and working for what you got. Nobody was handed anything, and I don't know whether they're the beneficiaries of white privilege or not, or whether it truly exists. But seeing this, I just told them, your kids are going to have to go what I went through now. They're about 8 years old, and what did we have? We had a setback in race relations that took 20 years. I mean, to get over, maybe 30, and we finally got to the point where, as I said, we were. Basically, I felt like a colorblind society. And now we're going to have to go back through this all again. Well, I hope it turns out better, because if it turns out like South Africa has turned out, which we're getting warnings from our friends in South Africa, how we better open up our eyes, because what they're seeing here is a mirror image of what happened to South Africa, except for the fact that we still are the slight majority. Over there, of course, whites were a vast minority. And of course, we're hearing warnings from people in Venezuela who are also urging us to keep our eyes open and not take this too lightly. But it's a different thing. It's just your comment started us off by saying about the tearing down of statues. Well, this is just a more formulated Marxist plan. I mean, Black Lives Matter has admitted that they are a Marxist-inspired organization. I mean, if you look at what they've done to these poor slobs that are out on the street, these white ones, and believe me, the most dangerous thing to the black community is a white liberal. Okay, blacks do not need whites to succeed. We ought to stay out of their business. They can do it better themselves and take care of their own problems before we get involved. But that is a real problem as white liberals. But that being said, people need to understand that they're out to destroy the church, right? Destroy religion, which they've already said they want to do. They want, Jesus is too white, Mary's too white. We're going to burn these churches down, destroy the stained glass, destroy it. So religion is on the target list. And of course, education system has been corrupted for the past, I don't know how many decades has it been teaching this baloney to kids. So what they want to do is separate, and that's the real purpose of, I believe, of the public school system, is destroy patriotism. You don't really, and that is done through basically manipulating history and lying about history. So what is and that list can go on and on about the Marxist planks that are taking place right before our eyes. Marx himself knew race was a better way to divide people than class. But what's the one thing that could possibly bind us in this country as being Americans? Okay, black, white, Asian, Hispanic. If you want to be an American, that's something that can bind us. So what's their ultimate goal here, starting in the elementary schools, is to destroy all patriotism, so that there's nothing left to bind us together but the oppression narrative. And the oppression narrative preaches victimhood, disempowering. If I was a black kid and I had been told that every time I went for a job interview, I was going to be discriminated against, that walking out on the street meant that just going to get a soda, I was going to be gunned down by some racist cop, well, why would I even leave my house in the morning? I have no chance. I'm hopeless at that point in time. And as many black conservatives have pointed out over the years, the welfare state and just handing out money just keeps them in a state of perpetual modern-day slavery. People need to read both of our publications, Barnes Review specifically, because we're going to say what very few are saying now. And I don't know what type of repercussions we're going to have from protesters and vandals and Black Lives Matter, but we got to tell the truth, because nobody is telling the truth. A couple of them on there, and I hate to ever give any credit to the mainstream news media, but Tucker Carlson does actually tell the truth once in a while. We warn everybody now. We've got enough historical examples of the way Marxists work, what the redistribution of wealth being one of their goals here. I heard a black spokesman for Black Lives Matter saying just the other day that they thought about time for white people to give up their houses to black people.
Well, they tried that in Cuba however many years ago, and we see how well that turned out. Extra, read all about it. If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today. Extra, read all about it.
The problem is that, first of all, nobody will talk about the real problem. The real problem is something happened to black culture in this country. And I don't know if it was us or what, but they went from going to school and getting an education and learning how to read and write. If you can't learn to read and write, you can't function in Western society. You can't communicate. If you don't have mathematics skills, you can't do the simplest of jobs, okay? So if something happened to the point where in Baltimore, for instance, at $16,500 per student per year, I think they spend in Baltimore, you had, 13 wards that didn't have a single student, black or white, who passed their math proficiency. This is the problem. The poverty is the problem, and street violence is the problem. I don't really know how you're ever going to address it, but I don't think it's something that white liberals can address. This has to come from inside the black community. And the first thing you have to do, remember when you're an alcoholic, right? You have to admit to yourself you have a problem. Isn't that like the first thing people are supposed to do with drug addiction and alcoholism? But this is the one thing that black liberals and white liberals will not allow the black community to admit, that there's a problem in that community. It's not necessarily white people or racism. It's something has happened and it's degraded. But look at it. It's almost like the Marxist brainwashing was test cased on the blacks first. So what did we do? Or what did they do? Because I'm not a Marxist. Well, they destroyed the public school system. They destroyed all patriotism. Religion was pretty fervent in the black community for many, many decades. I don't know what it is now, but I know the disintegration of the family in black and especially urban poverty-stricken areas is terrible. I mean, we have 75% being born out of wedlock and some huge number with no father at home. This is what black conservative, brilliant man Larry Elder says that is the biggest problem, is there's no fathers in the home. So I don't think the biggest problem they're facing currently, I don't know if I'm off track here, but the biggest problem they're facing is racist white cops or evil black cops. I think that the cops are actually down in those neighborhoods quite more often, seeing that currently the statistics say that violent crime is being committed, 75% is committed by people in black communities, in bad black communities. So I have a feeling, Ed, that we will do this all over again. Just what we did in the 60s, maybe a little more radical. We'll see who's there to draw the line as where this stops. Hopefully Trump could have gotten involved a little bit earlier, I think, in protecting these monuments, because the monuments are monuments, right? But they're symbols. They're symbols of the thing we love. They're symbols of our past. They're trying to take that away and make us ashamed of our own past. And that's what these poor 25-year-old or 18 to 25-year-old white people out in the streets are marching, who just won't admit they're just so loaded with pathetic guilt. Anyway, we're going to do it all over again. And it's going to turn out the same, because the approach is wrong. The approach is completely wrong. There's a list of one black commentator had recently of all the things we've tried to do, racial quotas in hiring, preferences, school scholarships, black colleges, black groups, black community sources. Larry Elder says, polls find young blacks less likely to call racism America's #1 issue. A Times CNN poll found that 89% of black teens consider racism in their own lives to be a small problem, or not a problem at all. Twice as many black teens as whites believe that failure to take advantage of available opportunities is a bigger problem for blacks than discrimination. Now, at least they're being honest with themselves, and if this is young black people, but the white liberal isn't going to let him think that for too long. He's going to force down his throat that he's a victim and that it's helpless and that all it's going to help is a monetary reparations of some kind.
Welcome to the Christendom curriculum. You know, every parent who decides to homeschool wants to secure a great education for their child, while also saving time and money. But these days, many parents have another concern. They also want a homeschool curriculum without all the multiculturalist, politically correct diversity doctrine that's really little more than a thin disguise for an anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-Western civilization bias. Now there is such a curriculum. The Christendom curriculum gives your children a complete education in Bible, history, literature, and more, focusing on the classic academic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we also tell the story of Christendom, the story of the Christian nations, especially as Christ's kingdom has been historically manifest in the nations of Europe and America. And we do so without apology. So if you want to help raise the next generation of culture warriors, if you want your children to grow up with a love for Christ's kingdom and for their own nation, while at the same time learning how to defend America and rebuild the West, the easy-to-use Christendom curriculum is for you.
Candace Owens is quite a smart gal. She's under heavy fire now for refusing to accept George Floyd, for instance, as a martyr, and wondering why the black community can't hold up martyrs that are contributing to society. As we know, you've seen the pictures of the woman George Floyd and his cohorts beat up, and a pregnant woman, and threatened and held gun to her pregnant stomach and robbed her blind, right, for one of his many crimes. But she says liberals believe that they own blacks. Still, they believe there's something proprietary about being black in this country, and if you deviate from the way they want you to think and the way they want you to act, they grow violent. And this is also Marxist rhetoric, and Marxist ideology is exactly that. We know that it's a complete lie, and I've said this before, that Hitler's brown shirts were running around and the communists rose up against them. It's completely the opposite. Communists and Marxists were running wild in Germany trying to take over the government. It was only Hitler's brown shirts that fought them on the streets. Today you couldn't do that in America because you would be arrested like that poor machete-wielding fellow in Dallas who, protecting a store and protecting his own life, is the criminal there. So,
well, if you read Mein Kampf, Hitler makes it clear that the communists had violent armies basically in place in all of the major cities, and to even have a voice in the arena, you had to show up with enough muscle to overcome the Marxist muscle that was already in place in whatever place you wanted to go and conduct a rally or give a speech or whatever.
Well, if you look at the number of Germans who were killed in that particular period of time, it was astonishing. It was in the 10,000, 20,000 range, killed by innocent people, killed by German, well, Jewish German, and also foreign countries, communists who came in from other neighboring nations to cause trouble.
But Hitler also points out, too, that once he had his brown shirts, that the communists stopped showing up at the places where he was going to give speeches, because when there was somebody who was actually going to fight back against them, they went and slinked away. So, there really wasn't as much violence there as you would think there would be.
No, generally they're not up for a fight. Yeah. They do like to work in gangs and to take on unarmed people, et cetera, et cetera. And part of that thing is, by the way, taking away our ability to defend ourselves in this democratic liberal push for gun control. Another part of the plank to just make us absolutely helpless. I'm sure you've seen by now the group of, look like Antifa to me. It may have been mixed in with some Black Lives Matter people. And believe me, listen, some of the people in Black Lives Matter, they've got a gripe. And they can protest all they want and carry signs and do all this, just don't resort to violence or there's going to be trouble. But they broke down the gate to the gated community or whatever, and some people had worked pretty hard, I imagine, to get these nice houses and such. And the cops knew they were coming but didn't show up in St. Louis to do it. This is probably because they were told not to. And so those people would come out of their houses with their semi-automatics or maybe their Lugers, whatever they got, right, 9mm or revolver, stand out in front and just tell these people they better not destroy their houses. Well, now the black prosecutor, a female in St. Louis, says she's going to bring the full weight of the justice system against these people who would dare brandish a weapon in front of their houses, as people who are threatening to kill them, kill their dog, and ransack their house. We've always tried to be neutral. We're not really too neutral anymore. But we will say this. Donald Trump is a flawed human. However, he's done some great things, I think, for the American worker of all races. But this upcoming election has transcended Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. There's more than that going on here. There's really Marxism, socialism, who knows how far it could go, forced changes in textbooks, ripping down of monuments, national parks maybe have no white days. Okay, I forget, there was one person, a teacher at a school a couple of years ago who was supposed to be a blacks only day on campus, and he refused to leave and he was run out of town. I feel like it's become much more than Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. This is really sanity, law and order, Western civilization versus the mob.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
And we are now totally out of time for this week's TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Show, but I want to thank our editor, Paul Angel, for some great insights on what's going on in our country right now. And we'll have more to hear from Paul on our other show, TBR Radio Presents the TBR History Hour, as Paul and I discuss the new incoming July-August issue of the Barnes Review magazine.